All right, you're not going to believe this next story. An op-ed published in The Atlantic yesterday is urging Americans to adopt what the author is calling a pandemic amnesty, essentially saying that everyone should simply forgive everyone else for what they did and said during the incredibly damaging COVID lockdowns. That shuttered countless small businesses and set our nation's students behind for years to come. Of course, right on cue, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten, chimed in, also declaring her support for this forgiveness. Well, joining us now with his reaction is the host of the Dave Rubin Report, Dave Rubin. Dave, do you want to send your forgiveness out? Because I noticed you sent a tweet out in response to this saying absolutely no amnesty. Some of us did not lose our minds, did not force vaccines or lockdowns, and instead fought for freedom the entire time. So, you know, it feels like these people who wanted to jam this all down on us want a free pass on their mistakes, but still haven't acknowledged their misgivings, their poor handling.
Yes, that is the key part there, Sean, what you said right at the end. That first off, how about a mea culpa from some of these people? How about, hey, we're sorry for locking so many of you in your homes and not letting you go to your grandmother's funeral and not letting you go to work and delaying kids from going back to school. So now kids have all sorts of learning issues, or forcing vaccines, or telling us that hospital workers are essential until they don't get vaccinated, then they're non-essential. I mean, the amount of choices, horrific life choices that those people forced us to make, you would think that they would have a little humility and at first say sorry. Look, I believe that we can all make mistakes. And I have said from the beginning of COVID, I was on with you guys right from the beginning, I would grant everybody about 2 weeks amnesty, meaning that in those first 2 weeks, nobody knew what was going on. We had never been hit by anything like this. We all went a little crazy. A little bit after that, everyone needed to start figuring out what the score was. And I'm very proud to say that I was one of the people that immediately was fighting for freedom. I was fighting against lockdowns. I was fighting against mandates. If you wanted to get vaccinated, go ahead and do it. I did not, and I certainly was not going to force any of my employees to do it. But there is a twang of disingenuousness here, which is sort of, they're all realizing, the writers at The Atlantic and the Democrats and the powers that be, they're realizing that we're seeing all of their either mistakes or intentional attacks on us. And they know that they're about to lose power in a week, and they're worried about what the Republicans might do when they have the House and the Senate.
That's so right. All of their mistakes are coming to light now. We're seeing the ramification of those. I think, you know, one of the groups that was hit the worst, and Sean kind of mentioned it, are kids. You know, just last week, we had the National Assessment of Educational Progress released, its first set of findings since the start of the pandemic, showing that students' proficiency, math, reading, the basics, dropped the biggest amount in 30 years, Dave. I mean, you think about this, do we have apologies from Democrats coming out saying, I'm sorry that we locked down your schools, or the Biden administration saying, I'm sorry that we were listening to these teachers' unions and we cared more about them than the education of your students? Zippo.
Lindsay, it's not just that we don't have apologies. In many cases, they're saying they would do it all over again. Randi Weingarten, it's not that she hasn't issued an apology. She basically is saying she did nothing wrong. Rochelle Walensky, who I think has COVID again for like the 5th time, despite something like 5 booster shots from the CDC, I haven't heard any apologies from her. Kathy Hochul, who I honestly believe is about to lose in New York to Lee Zeldin, which is so profoundly spectacular. She said in the debate last week that she would do it all over again, meaning mandates and lockdowns and the rest of it. So again, it's one thing to sort of want to say, hey, we all kind of went crazy. It was a once in a 100-year pandemic, something like that. Let's all try to be a little bit kinder. But you have to be willing to acknowledge you did something wrong first. You know, those of us that fought against this stuff, we were demonized. People lost their jobs. People lost friends. I mean, the list goes on and on. So maybe they owe us a little bit more than we owe them. And by the way, if they kind of come around and do some of that, I will be gracious. I will. But not yet.
So, exactly. Just admit that you were wrong. Say you're sorry, and then we can move on. But that's part of the process. The thing that I think is so interesting on so many of these issues, right? So last week, we see these test scores come out. Lowest in decades on so many key issues, right? And I feel like in so many cases, the solution is obvious. We locked kids down. and we wonder why things happen. And then we have this big discussion about focusing on pronouns. And we go into the classroom, and that's the priority. Figure out what their pronouns are, not about learning. And we sit back and go, gosh, why are these test scores coming in so low? And everyone wants to have a discussion about it when I'm like, no. The answer is actually quite simple, because we're not focused on educating.
Yes, you're quite right. And the simple explanation of that is the same explanation of why once institutions, put aside kids and schools for a moment, once any institution, whether it's a tech institution or a place of higher learning, or whether it's a shoe store, once they go woke, once they say, hey, we will hire based on this color, that color, we're going to focus on gender and all of this other nonsense, instead of doing what their core competency might be, which might be to sell shoes if they're a shoe store or educate kids if they're a school, once they do that, their eye is off the ball and they will slowly degrade the product. That is exactly what has happened at our public schools. So it's a confluence of a couple things. You have the wokeness that came in that took kids that should be learning about math and an honest assessment of history, et cetera, like we had when we were growing up. And then you started teaching them about gender and how evil America is. And then you also did it so that they had to sit in their rooms and be on Zoom, where we all know they had other windows open and they were probably playing games or texting with their friends or whatever else. And now we know we have a generation. I mean, it's so deeply depressing. We have a generation of young kids, probably around the ages of 2 to 7, that are having unbelievable rates of delayed speech and all sorts of social conditioning problems. Almost everyone watching this, I'm sure, knows somebody in their family that has a kid that's going through some version of that. And it is flat out because of Randy Weingarten, the teachers union. It's because of all of these people that demanded we had to behave how they wanted us to behave. It is not because of the people who fought to keep us free. And that's a good reminder of where I am, the great free state of Florida, where, yeah, we did stay free.
That's right. Dave Rubin, always appreciate your take. Thank you.
Good to see you guys.
You bet. All right, well, with just 1 week to go until the midterms, there are several races across the country that we're eyeing closely. When we come back, we're going to talk with former Congressman Doug Collins of Georgia and Truth Social and former California Congressman Devin Nunes about those races. Stay tuned.